Thank you for joining us today on HXGN TV. I'm your host, James Rostron. Today, I am joined with the Hobie Memorial Foundation. Our topic this afternoon will be Artistry, Craftsmanship, and Metrology, and how the Hobie Foundation is creating a lasting memorial to water sports innovator Hobie Alter. I'm joined today by Hobie Foundation President Robbie Roberson, artist for the project Lance Jost, sales engineer Scott Zanio. Let's begin today by talking about the Hobie Memorial Foundation. How did the foundation get started, and what is the vision for the foundation?
Well, I have an extensive background working with Hobie for about 40 years. And Hobie, as you know, he's passed away about 2 years ago. And everything was kind of in limbo, and I know there were thoughts of creating some type of a memorial for Hobie, celebrating his life and keeping his flame alive. And Lance Jost is our local artist where we live in Dana Point, and he came up with a concept. Hey, we need to memorialize Hobie and keep his flame alive. And so, knowing that I had a background working with Hobie and the family, knew the family for many, many years, he approached me about getting involved. And so it evolved into a committee. We approached the city of Dana Point as far as locations and what we wanted to do. And they suggested that we get a committee together of 6, 7 people and start going further, take it to the next step. So we did that. We've been getting donations from people and corporate sponsors, corporate donations, and we're moving along building it. We're building a scale model right now, and thanks to Hexagon, we're able to go further and start the carving of the body, Hobie's body, to put on the memorial. And as you'll see in the pictures, kind of the scope of the project, what's going on.
Constructing a monument to Hobie Alter is a primary goal of the organization. How are you using Hexagon Manufacturing Intelligence's services and technology to achieve this goal?
Well, the scanning, very important. One thing we wanted to do is get Hobie's body right, and the proportions, because the monument's going to be seen all over the world. Hobie was a true international person. And so we set up the Hobie Cat in a shop and had a model, a real human model that closely resembled Hobie as much as we could. And Scott with Hexagon was very nice to bring the equipment down and scan the model that we have. And that was one thing that the family was adamant about, is get the body right. They want to make sure that, the proportions were right.
Lance, let's discuss the relationship between art and metrology further. Starting from a point-up process, how have some of these new technologies benefited your work?
Well, we know historically there's been many different methods that artists have used, and through history we can trace that artists used to use a gridding system so that they could do two-dimensional art, but that in itself is somewhat subjective, and when you go to three-dimensional, it becomes even more problematic. And we know about, people are used to putting their thumb up and going, okay, it's about that big, right? And of course, everybody has standardized thumbs, so you can relate this to somebody else and they'll know exactly how big it is. Obviously ridiculous, like I said, it's extremely subjective when you're having to deal with these older processes. So various artists through the Renaissance came up with pointing processes where they had elaborate machines that they would triangulate to get it to reproduce the proportions and relationships of objects from one to another. Now, when we're talking about something as complex as a fellow who's sitting on a Hobie Cat that's flying on a wave, right? You can understand the relationships of all of these objects, the sail to the guy, to the boat, to this wave. How do you calculate that with the little pointing process? It's a nightmare. You'd get lost in it, and the project would probably never get off the ground because nobody could afford it. As it is, with Hexagon coming and doing a three-dimensional scan of the image of a model sitting on the boat, so I don't have to figure out exactly how his butt hangs over the edge of the bar and everything else. That's all done for me, and I can get on with the imagining how I'm going to make this thing impressive and beautiful, right? Which is really what my job should be, you know. So yes, this is, to me, just incredibly liberating to be able to do this. I went to way too much school and learned way too little there, and have had to improvise on my own and figure out how to do the projects that I've done. But this new technology streamlines it in such an amazing way that, I mean, pardon me for being excited, but I love to be able to work with this, and I'm very grateful for Hexagon's, you know, cooperation and working with me to do it.
Let's talk a little bit more about your career. I know you've had many decades in the art world. What are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of over those years?
Well, a number of years ago, through the surfing community again, I came to the situation of realizing that Jimi Hendrix was looking for a mural in his recording studio, and I had heard that a fellow one of the fellows that was in Endless Summer movie, the consummate surf movie of all time, he had the idea of doing another surf movie and getting Jimi Hendrix to score the movie. And so he ran all over the place, tried to get backstage, and kept getting thrown off stage, trying to talk to the manager about this project. And he finally gave up, went surfing in Maui, where Jimi Hendrix's manager showed up, where he was surfing, of all amazing things. And when I heard that they were going to do this surf movie, I went, oh, I can do the titles for the movie. And so I went to meet with them, and Jimmy's manager said, oh, Jimmy wants a mural in his recording studio in New York City. So I ended up going to New York City and spending 9 months in a place that was very foreign to me, being a surfer. And there's no surf in New York City. And painted the inside of his recording studio. As he asked for space, I made it look like you were inside of a spacecraft looking out at scenes in space. And so that was a wonderful opportunity to do something like that. I primarily have been a sculptor all my life, and I have done sculptures. I have a line of ocean-related mermaids and King Neptune and the Ocean Guard and all those kinds of things, which one can see on my website, which is lancejostdesigns.com. And then bringing it up to more recent times, I recently received a commission from California Baptist University in Riverside to do a 10-foot tall warrior and on horse. They are the Lancers. Their sports team are the Lancers. And so we are doing a Lancer on horseback, 10 foot tall, in my living room. And thanks to Metrology, we're able to take my little 10-inch model and do a 3D scan of it, and then have that carved into a 10-foot foam horse and rider, with all the relationships exactly in the right position and everything else, so that I end up, instead of taking wire and cable and everything else and twisting it into shape to have structure, and then trying to cover it over with clay, which gets extremely bulky and heavy and time-consuming, I'm skinning over foam with about that thick of clay and then finishing the detailing. And it's made it possible for me to be able to bring this in at a price that the university had no problem with, and I'm making good money on it. I wouldn't have been able to without this process. It's totally revolutionary for me.
That's a great story. And I know, Robbie, you've had a long relationship with Hobie Alter and done some amazing projects with him. Could you share some of that with the audience?
Well, I started in Hobie surfboard shop back in '67, and a year later got drafted building this catamarans. Started building the Hobie 14, and pretty much went through most of the processes, and I was always kind of there when Hobie was building a new project, and went on to build the Hobie 33, which was a 33-foot racing sailboat that's still 30 years later winning races against multi-million-dollar boats, which is a testament to his design. Mm-hmm. And we finished up about 10, 15 years ago building his 60-foot power catamaran. This was his dream boat, and it was all built to his specifications and with no blueprints, just sketching on the napkin type thing, and lots of questions. Well, where do you want now, Hobie? How do you want this radius and this and that? So that worked out pretty good, and the boat ended up in Orcas Island, where he got to enjoy it for the rest of his life.
Scott, let's talk about your relationship to the Hobie Foundation and some of the work you've done to bring metrology to the project. Can you start with how you got going with them and some of the services you've offered them?
Okay. Well, I was initially contacted by, I think, Lance when we did the horse for him, the Lancer. And then they said, we'd really be interested in, instead of scaling up, scaling down and then scaling up and making modifications to a catamaran, a person, a sail, and the entire project, because they wanted to do this bronze statue down in Dana Point. So they asked me if I could spend some time and donate some time. So I went down to shop down San Clemente. We set up a 15-foot roamer arm with our latest HPL 20.8 scanner, and we scanned the model that you see right here on top of the boat. And what we did is we made that into a point cloud. That then became a polygonal mesh. Then that became a step file, and we can actually manipulate that in CAD, make changes, things like that, and then we can 3D print it and do our scaling and everything else.
And going on with that topic, can you tell me a little bit more about the workflow for the project in terms of, combining the separate skills of artist, craftsman, and metrology? How are you working through some of those challenges?
Well, I feel like I have the easy part. I have incredible equipment where I turn it on, set it up, turn it on, scan it, digitize it, make the changes and make manipulations that is needed for the project, and continue that. And then with feedback, we can, the model actually wasn't Hobie, unfortunately, so it was a friend of Hobie's, I think, growing up. So what we did was what we're doing is Lance is actually making a clay model, life size of Hobie from an actual picture, and then we're going to go back, scan it, and then go back and put that head basically back onto the Hobie model, so that it's more of it's realistic.
Robbie, Hobie Alter had a very innovative mind, and he was a prolific designer. What are some of the things that he's brought to the water sports world?
Well, Hobie started building surfboards back in the early 50s out of balsa wood. And that was the technology at the time. Cut down a balsa wood tree, shape it, fiberglass it, and make a surfboard out of it. And it was in surfing's infancy. The Hobie, along with Gordon Clark, they developed a polyurethane foam system where they poured the foam into a mold, which made a pre-shaped foam blank that they could put a centerline wooden stringer in and then shape it, then fiberglass that, and it made the board very light and maneuverable. And that really revolutionized the surfboard industry. We, at that time, had so many people get into surfing. And then on with his Hobie Cat development, he took the foam sandwich concept and applied that to a small sailboat, the Hobie 14, which made that small sailboat feasible and made it fast. And we like to think of Hobie as the godfather in the composite industry. Nowadays, almost every performance boat, or most boats to that matter, are cord construction, as well as aircraft and a lot of high performance composite parts.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks again for joining us today on HXGN TV. I'd like to thank my guests, Mr. Robbie Roberson from the Hobie Foundation, artist Lance Jost, and my colleague Scott Zanio. For more information about the Hobie Memorial Foundation, please visit hobiememorial.com, or to learn more about Lance's work, please visit lancejostdesigns.com. Thanks again.